Hi, welcome to the regular meeting of the Tree Advisory Committee for the City of Petaluma. We call to order and a roll call, please.
Rakusen,
Here.
Formby,
Here.
Cover,
Here.
McCurlane,
Here.
Berticelli.
Here.
Thank you.
Seeing that we have no, actually, we'll move right into general public comment, and I believe Stephanie Sanchez has some nice words for us.
Is this working? Okay. Well, hello, everybody. I am very pleased to be here, and I have met a couple of you in other places. I think, Cindy, you and I met at one of the relief meetings way long ago. And I'm here largely just to let you know who I am and what I feel I represent about the city, about specifically Midtown. And there's so many things I'd like to say. I've been thinking about this for so long, the problem of the tree desert that we have here, that everybody has designated the tree desert and talks about as a problem. And then it seems to kind of get shuffled off, which I understand why. We just don't have the kind of the demographics in our area to support the kinds of programs that I know Relief is doing, and also urban, you guys on the Urban Forest Committee. It's like getting really engaged community together is, it's easy in places where folks are more affluent, educated, and savvy about the issues of climate change. And it's much tougher in the area that I live in. Now, if you look at a Google map of my house, you won't see it because there's so many trees planted in front of my house. It's the first thing I did when I moved in here 20 years ago. And I moved here from Southern California, and I taught at the JC for 20 years. I'm a professor of art. And during that 20 years, I really expected to see changes in the neighborhood, and they just didn't happen to any extent. If you drive around and you see some of the wonderful things that folks have done in my area, you can bet that they are white and they are educated, they're college educated, and they're affluent, and sometimes they're retired, but usually not. And the problems about how to get people engaged in that place are very myriad. And I've been working on it for 20 years by myself, and being an individual just doesn't work. And I've found that I've brought many people around to the idea of needing trees and wanting them in that area. I don't know how much time I have left, but John Shribs and I talked. Okay. John Shribs and I talked a couple months ago, and John must know about grants that I don't know about or others don't. And we talked about, he's very aware of the problems, and I think all of you are, about why it's remained the way it is. But we talked about the cost of trees, the cost of maintaining them for 3 years, and the cost of taking up concrete when necessary as something that could be covered by some grants. He mentioned something about San Francisco, and if any of you go there a lot, you can see it happening. There are places where little patches of concrete have been taken up, and trees and other growing things have been planted. But anyway, it sounds a little bit like pie in the sky, but I truly think that we need a different approach to that area. And I'll say one more thing, which is that it is an equity issue. We have terrible problems with speeding. I've been up in front of the city council over the last 20 years talking about it, but there's a disrespect for that area. And I have friends up on the west side who've admitted to me that they just speed down Madison. Oh, now that we know you, we're not going to do that. But my 3 minutes, okay. but anyway, that's,
Yeah, we have time if you want to, is that appropriate?
yeah, well,
We'll allow another couple of minutes.
yeah, okay, thank you. Yeah, because I'll tell you something, you know, if I wanted to be selfish and lazy, I've got trees all over my property, and I don't have a big property, but I've grown them there. And what I see is that people are afraid of planting trees because they're afraid that they're going to get stuck with the cost of the sidewalks being turned up. There are medians that I've taken photographs of which are barren, and they've been barren for 20 freaking years. And a few people have planted trees on them, and they're doing beautifully, so they can grow. Yes. On the side, yeah, it's too. Yeah, that's what, thanks for telling me what it was, because I've just called them mediums just for lack of not knowing what they're called. But it's those
Sorry,
planter
I'm
strips.
going to interrupt here. This is the general public comments. We don't ask questions of clarification. So we just, if we allow for the comment, go ahead. Stephanie,
Well,
sorry.
anyway, no, that's what I'm referring to. And there are individuals who've planted trees successfully in them, and I've taken it upon myself to plant a couple with the neighbor's help. There's one other thing I want to, and it's tough to keep them growing, you know, when they're young. Like I heard a lot of people last night talking about pruning and what a problem it was for them, but just getting them to grow to the point where they need to be pruned is pretty challenging, I've seen. So it's in issues of watering. I have personally tried to engage some of the people of color that live in my neighborhood, and I have gotten them on board, but they're so darn busy with their jobs, their kids, and their and church. But I'm actually grooming someone that I really think would be a great representative for my area. But she's not here. She doesn't have the time to be here. You know, and we can all see that the people that get involved in this stuff are not people of color. So we just have a lot of work to do to engage the community, and I'm starting to do it. But I now want to get people involved in a way that is less than just me as an individual. So I've started sending around just a statement of interest that John Shribs had suggested that I do, and so I have that going. But I would really like to work with you in some way and just make you aware of of issues that you might not know about, but know that I have plenty of information and understanding of why the situation exists like that. And also, it's really poor city planning in the 50s that laid out those strips the way they did. I mean, we're stuck with those things. So it is a problem, but we can plant on them, and I've done it, and it does work. The trees do grow. So thank you for letting me speak a little bit longer, and I'm hoping, I'm not pointing fingers at anyone, I'm really hoping that you guys can kind of pay some more attention to that and not just like go on and then put trees in parks. That's wonderful that you're putting them in there, but gosh, we really need this neighborhood to step up. We need help with it. You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Yeah, thank you for your efforts. Appreciate it. So I see the approval of minutes is being moved to October. Do we have an update from the Communication and Outreach Ad Hoc Committee?
Most of the members this summer have been traveling, and I think we've had such a flurry of activity in June and July, but I think since our last meeting, there is no update.
I'm shocked. Roger, we're talking about our heritage tree list progress? update?
Sorry, Chair Formby, we have to open it up for general public
Oh, I'm
comment.
sorry. Is there a general comment? Seeing none, we'll move on to item number 4, heritage tree list progress update.
I passed what I had on to Cindy. There's a digital file.
So I have the documents that came from the past ad hoc from David. And is that your final update? Is that all the work complete? Okay. So I think in this, it would be like I can bring it to the committee or email you the work that's been done, but that ad hoc committee is now complete with their work.
Then I would say that'll be the end of that ad hoc. Okay.
Excuse me, Chair, can you speak louder and closer to
That'll
your
be
mic?
the end of that. So I think that's complete. Then any public comment? Seeing that there is none. Next item, number 5, street tree list ad hoc progress update. We did approach planning about doing a sort of a stopgap, at least get some trees on our list as a measure until we get the new sorry.
The update to the ordinance?
The update to the ordinance. Thank you, Cindy. It's been a long day. And, but it was decided that we're so close to that being completed, we'll just wait and do that at the same time because it needs to be brought before the city. So but I would like to, is this where we bring in we'll bring in the new member later?
That's item 6 on the agenda.
That's item 6, okay. Then is there any public comment about our street tree list ad hoc? Seeing that there is no, oh. Did you have something, Bill?
Committee comment.
Yeah.
All right. I had a neighbor ask about, what street trees to plant or consider, and they're well aware of the old list, and I was encouraging them to maybe reach out to you or somebody to talk about what other trees to consider. Would you think that, are we there yet, or?
They're welcome to. As a member of the tree advisory committee, we're allowed to make executive decisions and actually put trees that aren't on the list or recommend trees that aren't on the list. The trees on North Water Street actually aren't on the approved city list, but it was recommended that I could make that decision, and I did. And I wasn't chair then, so I think that, you certainly could. But please, anybody is more than welcome to reach out to me, and I'm happy to advise. So, yes. To answer your question, yes.
And then there was some interesting feedback last night from our consulting arborist about, what street trees are getting planted. Would we maybe talk about last night's meeting at a later point, but Cindy? Or-
Sure, the arborist is going to come at some point to bring the UFM to the committee and to ask for feedback, so that would happen in that process.
So I guess part of what we're looking at to upgrade our list, and it's a fairly good list as it is. There are just some things that should be on there that aren't, or a couple that should probably not be on there. But I think we're trying to make it a little more usable to the average person to say, put in the right tree in the right place. So if you've got a nice big planting strip and you've got no overhead wires, there's certainly no reason you should be planting a crepe myrtle there. And as a matter of fact, it would be nice if the city didn't allow that. But I don't know that it is. There's general guidelines on the list as it exists. So, right tree in the right place. It just needs to be a lot more concise and I think easily readable. So.
One of the many challenges of everybody being responsible and having to make the decision about their tree in front of their property and making it work as a community benefit. What's best for the community could be maybe better determined by a professional that employed by the city or consulting for the city.
Yeah, I think all of those are great things. I think with the tree list is we're mostly concerned about the right tree in the right place and actually getting ourselves a better list than exists. But as I said, it's pretty good as it exists, so people should certainly feel empowered to use it and plant what they see fit. But if they have any questions, please reach out, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Yeah. Any further comment? All right. Then we'll move on to item number 6, which is a recommendation reopen ad hoc committee memberships. And there's been, Eberly has expressed interest in being on our tree advisory committee, and she's absent. And so I believe we can add her in absentia.
Sure, Chair Formby, I think your request is for a motion to reopen so that you can add members to any of the ad hocs. So if you'd like to ask the membership to motion in a second.
Is there a motion that we reopen these ad hoc committee membership committees?
I'll make that motion.
Do I have a second? All in favor? Any opposed? I mean, 2 abstentions, right? Then the motion passes.
So Chair Formby, if you'd like to, so the ad hocs that you have are the street tree, the street tree ad hoc, list ad hoc, you have the communication ad hoc, and then there's one more. Which one am I missing off the top of my head? Because,
The heritage tree list.
but that one's done now.
That's done.
Is that, do we only have 2? We know there's one more.
Do we have a relief ad hoc?
We don't have, we used to, but we don't have to have that. The city attorney's office had advised against having that. Oh, no, because the website.
Oh, I'm sorry, but that's number 7, never
Yeah.
mind.
The website ad hoc is also finished. So at this point, yes, you just have the 2. So if you'd like to reopen to look at the membership for your street tree list ad hoc, you can add 2 more members to,
Oh.
you have room for 2 because it's you and Roger, I believe, isn't it, in the makeup currently?
Yeah.
Oh, wait, no, you can have 3. I'm sorry, my brain is not functioning today. You can add up to 1 more, and I think Eberly had said she was interested. But if there's other committee members that are interested, you can also ask if there's interest to add to that ad
So we
hoc.
can have 3 total, is that correct? Yeah.
Yes.
So Eberly had expressed interest and said that she couldn't be here, but she would be willing to be added. So what's that, and is there anybody else that would be interested? Do we just add her? Do we need to vote or not?
You already opened it up, so you can add her.
Okay, well, then I would say that Eberly is our newest member of the Street Tree List Ad Hoc.
And I think the other item too is with the other ad hoc was the membership. Taryn's not here today, but Darren and Roger, are you still okay with the makeup of your ad hoc? Does anybody, all 3 of you are okay with staying on that ad hoc? Okay.
Okay. Do we have any public comment? Seeing that there is none, we'll move on to item number 7, which is a recommendation to establish a new ad hoc committee for our 2024 Arbor Day celebration. And do we have a,
So Chair Formby, I'll just go ahead and introduce the topic. So we've spoken a lot about Arbor Day, and in the past year, I think for you, Marianne, you weren't here last year when we spoke about, but there's a lot of ideas. Typically in the past, what's happened is the Parks Division has set up a tree planting, and that's been the official Arbor Day celebration for the city. But last year at the time, there's a lot of ideas brought forward by this committee. So I thought I would bring forward to see if you wanted to form an ad hoc to actually form what the Arbor Day celebration would be for 2024. There are also 2 other things for consideration. National Arbor Day generally falls at the end of April. I believe it's the last Thursday in April, so close to Earth Day. California generally has an Earth Day celebration that happens, Arbor Day celebration that happens more in February. So I'm not tied to either one. It's just that we've traditionally honored the April planting date or Arbor Day. And we're also not tied to that it has to be a planting because there's a lot of good ideas. And I think at that time, I just thought the committee might want to engage and help form what the city celebration would be instead of it coming from the department. But thoughts, and if you want to form that ad hoc. And if you don't, it's okay. I just thought I'd bring it now because any event takes some time to plan, so you're going to want more than just a couple weeks.
Thank you, Cindy. Yeah, I would agree with Cindy. It's this last year, we came in late, and there were a lot of good ideas thrown around, and I thought would have been some great things, but there was simply no time to plan it. So I think it's a good idea to establish this now and get those things in planning and do something really very special for 2024. Any more comment?
Yeah, I really like this idea. Last year I had thrown out, the idea of Tree Fest, which at first was just an idea, but I think there might be something we can do there. We've been talking about, our public comment today. We've been talking about shifting the culture around trees. And I think making an approachable event, throw in a little music, throw in a little food, get all the local folks, whether it's like Devil Mountain, whether it's our Parks and Rec city staff, kind of show up, have booths, talk to people, just create a gathering point. We can talk about what location would be best, but that's one idea that I really like. So I like the idea of this committee. I'm eagerly awaiting when you need volunteers.
I like the idea of a tree fest. Anybody else? Any other comment?
Is there a recommendation to have a motion, or would you like to stay this to the next agenda when there's more members here? Although Chair Formby, you will not be here next meeting.
I think I'll leave it up to the committee to decide if we want to table this and open it up for elections or membership or volunteers next in October. I can certainly, if I feel like I want to be on it, I can say so, but I know I won't be here. So. How does everybody?
I think waiting for other members might be a good idea because I think Eberly and Taryn are both very active and engaged.
Yeah.
And very good at community events and things, so it might be a good idea.
All right. Well, I think then we'll table this till next month. And
Sounds good.
I just, like to say that I think changing anything we can do to change the culture in this town about trees and get people excited about trees, I think is well worth doing. So. Are there any public comment? Seeing that there is none, we'll move on to committee comments. And I think I'll open it up first to any members of the committee that want to make comments. Seeing that there is none, I'll make comments.
Or liaison updates, maybe
Oh.
from
What's that?
liaison updates from Parks and Rec, maybe in planning and.
Okay. Is there? Should we have that?
Well, our meeting is tonight, but I don't know that there was anything specifically for the tree advisory.
Nothing from trees from the last meeting, but the major item that went to the Parks and Rec Commission, it's hard because they meet right after us, so you wait a whole month to remember. The turf item for Lucchese turf replacement was brought forth to the Rec Commission last meeting, and it was unanimously voted to not move forward with the synthetic turf by the Rec Commissioners.
What?
So that's where that one is sitting, and that was probably the major item and update, but we don't have anything from tonight's yet. Next month, I'm sure Mary Ann can report out on that.
Well, that was quite a nice update. From planning? Are you planning on liaison? Any updates? Oh, any updates from planning? Is it relevant, the Chick-fil-A parking lot?
Sure, you can provide any comments in your committee member comments.
Well, I don't really have much about that, but maybe Darren wants to talk about that because that's very exciting.
I'll just take a swing at it because Roger and I, so we did a SPAR review for the Chick-fil-A that's going to be replacing the Cattleman's that everyone knows. And without getting into that, a lot of it was about the design, but a main focus was on the parking lot and the trees. They're going to be planting, I believe it's 93 or 94 new trees on the site. I believe it was 93. And they had, per the general plan, they had identified that they'll be enhancing biodiversity and native tree coverage. But when we saw the list, there was a lot of strawberry trees and crepe myrtles, not great coverage trees. And the applicant said, well, the city told us to plant those. And the city staff said, hold on, we never gave you those trees, but they had taken our city street tree list and use that as the only trees they could plant on this site, which obviously are very different applications. So because we lack city standards to really enforce during a SPAR review, the applicant is not required to change their tree planting scheme necessarily. But I thought we did a great job in negotiating and pushing them to do a 60% native target, to basically ask them to go back to their design arborist, shoot for 60% native, which I believe they were already at like 34 or 35%, and focus on replacing crepe myrtles and strawberry trees, which I see as more ornamental when you really want to cover a lot of that asphalt, with better coverage trees. And we threw out coast live oak, sycamores, and they expressed concerns over the sidewalk or over the interactions with asphalt. But we kind of left that to them and their arborists to overcome with that restriction. And we also talked about potentially adding a canopy coverage requirement, but they were resistant to that. And again, we didn't really have teeth to force them to make a change, but I feel like we got some progress there. And we also had them remove or put temporary landscaping in 17 parking spaces, because they were going to have 170 parking spaces and the minimum was 63. So it's a pretty big, now for the applicant, they said they needed that to run their business, a high volume business. They want parking for their employees. But I think we kind of met with as much as we could, which is basically reducing by 10% and creating temporary landscape spaces. There wasn't much discussion of the design of the site, because I think most people were relatively, and I know I was surprised at kind of the pleasing nature of the design. The massing and the design was pretty good for that facility. It's going to look kind of like white with black trim, barn style design, and they're building another building on the site. So anyway, a lot of discussion was trees and parking, and I think the tree committee members helped kind of push that to be a little bit of a better project. So
Thank you. Yeah, that's a great.
Can I
Go
just?
ahead. Yes, please.
That's outstanding, by the way. I just love the fact that we steered the ship towards larger tree canopy, especially at a site like that that's an obvious heat island, and it's it could be vastly improved as a result. So, and I also want to mention I appreciated Roger saying something about the trees during the overlay planning commission meeting. Was it a workshop, I think? Yeah, maybe even 6 weeks ago or so. I felt like the early discussion about how trees could be incorporated into that design. And I think I was concerned with some of the feedback that maybe they would choose smaller trees that wouldn't interfere with the overhang. So hope that we'd come to a different result and have some good canopy there eventually. But thank you.
Thanks, Bill. I always wonder, I mean, it's nice to have canopy over a parking lot, and certainly I agree with it. But I'd like to know if there are more safeguards in place, and maybe that'll come with our new TPO. But what's to stop them to shaping them into 15-foot lollipops? Even if you have a big giant sycamore, which should be 90 feet tall, is now 12. So, which is common, especially in a parking lot, which I don't understand, but it just seems to be a common practice. So it'd be nice if there were safeguards for those sorts of things as well.
On that note, on that same topic, because I've been noticing different mutilation of street trees all around this city, what are we doing about that? When are we going to propose an ordinance that mandates some of these things?
Well, I think Heather might talk about that in a little bit, because it is a problem, and I know City Hall is talking about it. We're all talking about it. We're all noticing it. There seems to be an epidemic of crepe myrtles and an epidemic of cutting things down to half their size. I don't understand it, and it's actually being done by some professionals as well. It's not just homeowners. So it is a hot topic, and Heather's here. She's going to speak to us in a little bit. So, seeing that is there any other comments? Then I just wanted to say, I appreciate our public comment, Stephanie Sanchez. I appreciate with the idea with San Francisco with grants and things. It's come up in my neighborhood about taking up some of the concrete. And I live on the west side. And when we're talking about planting trees on my block, there's a lot of those areas that have been concreted in. And so it's been tasked to me, and I said I would ask about taking up that concrete, and if there's any sort of city services or we can get city help to do such things and get some trees in on our block. Because even though I live on the west side, in Oak Hill Brewster, which when I was a kid was entirely canopied in sycamores, which maybe there are 4 sycamores left in the entire hillside. So, maintenance is always an issue. It's certainly something that's on my mind. And I'd like to also see something done. Some of the medians that we have a great opportunity with the city, especially the median in Washington Street, right as you get off the freeway, which has some lovely oaks growing in it, but it had Mexican feathergrass, which is now actually deemed an invasive species. And anything else in there has died. I saw they had weed whacked it yesterday, which looks a lot better than the 4-foot weeds that were there for months. But and I have talked to Wendy at Relief about perhaps Relief could adopt something like that if it's legal, to plant natives in there and just do a big swath of Ceanothus or Arctostaphylos and have a native sort of pollinator, demonstration garden there. Not. I realize that's a lot of maintenance, but it could be done simply. But it also would be a nice sort of introduction to the city, and the same with the roundabout on Petaluma Boulevard South, which is, from what I understand, we can't have trees in there because people run them over, which is bizarre to me. A couple of bollards, it seems they run into bollards. Maybe we're not so liable if people run into bollards as if they run into a tree. Some large oaks would be wonderful in there, and a good understory planting. There are lots of ways to do good understory plantings that aren't going to require a lot of maintenance. Especially, I think the understory there is star jasmine, which is silly. Anyway, so that's all my comments. Should I close it down and go on to staff comment? That's what I'll do. I'm going to open it up to staff comment.
Sure, and we're going to go ahead and welcome Heather Hines to the podium to give staff comments.
I appreciated everyone's involvement in the conversation last night. And it was kind of rapid fire question. What about this tree? What about that? What happened here? So I did my best to respond to those. I said this last night that we are working on a lot of different things. And even just sitting here for as long as I sat, I had a bunch of notes like, oh, I should look into that. Oh, what's going on with that? Why can't we? So one of the things that happens is we try to sometimes do everything at once, and then kind of nothing happens all the way. So I said this at the meeting last night. I appreciate everyone's patience too, because I know there's a desire to have everything that has to do with trees fixed and brought up to a standard, and culture changed, and education, and an approved, tree companies list. And there were so many great ideas, and we will start going through them, but we can't do them all at once. So we are working on it. One of the things I wanted to do, and I talked with Cindy about coming, is just kind of give you an update on where we are with a number of things, because I know sometimes it feels like a vacuum, and we go back in and start working on things and have to lift our heads up and communicate that to all of you so you know what we're doing. So we are looking pretty comprehensively at trees, which I think is the direction from the council. I know it's the direction from this, or the desire from this committee. We're looking to maximize preservation of trees. We're looking to acknowledge trees for all that they are, and that has been kind of one of the things we've talked about is their shade, their carbon sequestration, their biodiversity, there's so many benefits. So trying to kind of flip that discussion to uplift and showcase trees for the wide range of community benefits they bring. And with that, a shift in how we look at everything we do, from a tree permit, a building permit, a street project, all those things that we need to uplift trees so that they are part of that conversation in the beginning and not an afterthought or well, now it has to fit in this scope or this form because we didn't think about it earlier. So that's what we're working on. So some of the things that we have been doing, really looking a lot at street trees. When I was last before you, street trees was such a focus. And so I've been working a lot with staff to talk about the street tree process, the removal process. What does our ordinance say? What currently in our ordinance, what can we kind of lean into? Even if we think it needs an update, what can we lean into today to start shifting that and start looking at it differently? So there has been a tightening and focus, I'd say, from Public Works that they are not going to be approving street tree permits unless they are absolutely necessary because of a hazard, kind of an imminent issue going on, and that there's no other option. So that has really happened. Now, that doesn't mean that people don't still cut trees down without a permit. And we've seen a couple of those recently, and there's been an immediate focus on it. What happened? What are we going to do about it? Was it an egregious thing that someone went out and just cut it? We're finding that a lot of the information we're getting when we go knock on the door and say, hey, what happened to your street tree, is a truck. So of course, unless you see it happen, I can't verify every single one, but we've had 3 recently that what we're told is that a truck hit it and broke it, and so that part of it was falling into the street, and so then they called somebody to, a tree removal or a tree company to come out, and they said it needs to be removed, and they remove it. So now the process is going out and saying, okay, you need to replace it. It's your responsibility to replace it. And getting back to the crepe myrtle discussion with I think that what the ordinance says is a suitable street tree replacement or something from the street tree list. And I think one of the areas that we can lean into that a bit is the street tree list has a lot of trees in it. They're not all appropriate in any location. And so trying to really lean into what is suitable. And, for instance, the one on Petaluma Boulevard by Theater Square, it's in a row of, I think they're sycamores, a row of sycamores. So I think the proper replacement is a sycamore, it seems, So we need to those are things we can lean into. Those are areas that the ordinance gives us some authority. So we have been focusing a lot on that, a lot on documenting. There's certain findings that have to be made to approve a street tree removal, making sure that we are leaning into those findings and clearly going through that exercise. So that is one thing that we have been spending a lot of time on, getting code enforcement officers out there to say, okay, a tree maybe hit it, but now it's your responsibility to replace that tree. So that has been a lot of our efforts recently. Another thing we did was we brought Ben Anderson, the certified arborist that was at last night's hearing, into contract with the city out of the community development department. And that was threefold. That was to have him under contract to assist with the code updates, so the zoning code update. So he and I have started meeting bi-weekly to take them in chunks and start talking about them and pulling different examples from other places that urban forestry has worked and thinks works well, doesn't work well, this one works really well except for, and kind of take the best options and make it the right size for Petaluma. Another component of our contract with Urban Forestry is to have them on call if we would like that for a cost recovery project. So if we have a discretionary review project that's in and staff has a question about their landscape plan or their arborist report or something they're proposing that doesn't seem right, or that we can bring him in to consult and give us feedback on that as a representative for the city, not through the developer's application. And then also for some of the kind of general things, a small budget for if we have questions on things that don't directly lead into a cost recovery account. So it's not something that the applicant is paying the bill, but we want their suggestion on whatever may come up. So really seeing that as a resource for staff to have a certified arborist who understands where the city is with their efforts, what we're working towards, and is in alignment with that. So we are working on the ordinance update. What I'd like to propose, or I have to Cindy, is that at your October and November meetings to have an agendized item where we do a study session on sections of the code. So bring back certain sections, kind of dig in, get your feedback on those so we can take them and revise them. The next meeting on other sections. So we have two opportunities to kind of dig in, bring drafts of certain sections to you that would go out with a staff report, maybe highlight some of the areas. We could do it this way, we could do it that way. What do you all think? Questions we have, are these the right definitions? You know, some of those things to really get you all's expertise and input into those drafting. From that, after we do get a recommendation from the Tree Advisory Committee, it would go to Planning Commission, and we are fortunate to have 2 members of this committee also sit on the Planning Commission, so that will be really good to emphasize the discussion at the Tree Advisory Committee. But they will make an ultimate recommendation to City Council because it is an update to the zoning code, and then it would go to City Council for review and approval. So that it is in place. We are working closely with Cindy with the Cal Fire grant to make sure we're meeting that. So we have not forgotten about that. We are not out of step with that. We are working in lockstep to make sure that we are keeping good with those deadlines. You know, I highlighted some of the things that we're working on within the existing ordinance with street trees. What I would also say is the structural deficiencies of our zoning code ordinance are much harder to lean into. And Howard and I had this conversation last night with a redwood tree, and even though redwoods are a protected tree, the way our ordinance is written, if you are not doing any, you know, you only have a building permit, if you're not doing what we call a discretionary review, which is when there's a, you know, Chick-fil-A had a discretionary review, it went to Planning Commission. If there's a entitlement in that way, we have more teeth. But if you are you just want to remove the tree in your backyard, even if it is under the protected trees, you don't need a permit. And that is we don't have a lot of room there, right? It is black and white in the code. So to me, I feel like that's really important for us to hop in, and that's like a immediate thing that I see as really necessary to stop some of the canopy loss that we're seeing, and at least have that no, you can't do that without a permit and a review. So that's one thing I kind of wanted to highlight, the difference between the street tree ordinance. It's not perfect, but I think we can lean into some of the things in there, whereas the zoning code ordinance actually there's not a lot of wiggle room in that. But in the spirit of being creative and flexible and furthering the vision and the direction that the community is going, in response to something like that redwood tree, I actually sat down and met with the chief building official today, and we talked about some strategies for requirements for a building permit to identify trees, to do tree protective protection fencing around to bring awareness to it, so that at minimum we're ensuring that that awareness is not lost and trees are damaged accidentally just because there's not an awareness of it. So where we can find flexibility or something we can do to further the vision and where we're going, we are trying to do that in the interim. Similarly, I was thinking with the street tree list, and I'd be happy to sit down with the ad hoc and talk about, is there ways we can have kind of memos, like interim memos that we could do that maybe identifies if it's not in there formally, but there's discretion for the tree advisory committee, we can add something that in the interim until this is updated, these are now additional tree species that have been identified by the tree advisory committee as being suitable. So I'm happy to also try to get creative with that where we can within the parameters of the ordinance and the enabling legislation. So that's just, I wanted to come and provide an update on what we've been working on, when you're likely to see us next, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Heather. I'll open it up for questions. Roger.
Cindy, last night there was some discussion about updating our city criteria for streetscape or for parkways and stuff like that. But that primarily applies to new projects. So it won't have much impact on the nature of the city. It may impact that project quality, but it seems like, and the question of percentage of coverage came up. And I know Cindy doesn't want to talk about that number, but it seems to me though, in order to get the percentage of coverage up, I think that's, if we're going to try to increase it, you have two choices. You have public right-of-way or you have private property. And so far I've heard that public right-of-way is not something we want to touch, not something that's budgeted, not something that we have staff to deal with. It's maintained by the private property, except for key areas, downtown or certain streetscape. But for normal neighborhood streets, boulevards, and so on, the individual property takes care of the tree out to the back of curb. The question is, if we're going to increase tree coverage, we're not going to do it by planting more parks. We're going to do it by planting streetscape, street edges, private property, programs to help to incentive neighborhoods to replant their block, big. So I'm concerned a little bit that we're kind of dealing with the way city works right now, but if you look at the cities that are successful with coverage, they have street tree programs, they have street tree departments, they have street tree maintenance. They have a big program that I think Petaluma needs to think about. What's the cost of that? Is it feasible? Is it not feasible? What's the different ways of approaching? If we still want to increase tree coverage, what are different ways to do that? And is that happening?
So I would say two things. One, I haven't heard that we're not talking about increasing tree canopy in public right-of-ways. So that's not something I don't know how much it's budgeted, that kind of stuff. I wish I had a, Public Works colleague here right now to help answer that. But I have not heard, I in fact sat down with Relief and said, could we start thinking about efforts to replant street trees in areas where they've been lost, so that the planter strip is there. I know that in some areas it'd be great to remove concrete, but what about what about starting with where there's areas where it's already there? That seems, yes,
like-
we probably have to do some soil amending. We have to think about how do we keep them alive? So we, brainstormed, is there a way that we could, put water bladders on them? And could we work with Cool Petaluma maybe to see if block leaders would adopt a block to fill those water bladders so that, we are talking about those things and different ideas. So I don't think it's accurate to say that we're not looking to increase street tree canopy as part of this.
But I guess the question behind all those movements would be budgets and priorities to taxes or whatever, however you get the money to do it. And I haven't heard any discussion of that even in the,
Yeah, well, there's grant funding. I mean, we're continually going after grant funding. So that's one thing. I am not able to speak on like I know last night it came up that I think it was San Francisco did a tax measure and that kind of stuff. And that was the first time I had heard of that. And so I definitely don't think that's like right around the corner. But there is conversation, and a lot of this is let's do things and get things done, like the ordinance update. But like I said, that's not like, oh, we do that and then we're like, okay, we're done. It's continuing to look at different things, but also making sure that we're not kind of scattershot our efforts where nothing quite gets across the finish line because we're trying to do too many things simultaneously too.
Thank you. Anybody else? Oh, go ahead, Bill.
Well, yeah, I guess a little to further Roger's kind of question around that and to repopulate our street trees, it would be interesting to look at what other communities or ordinances would have in place to some sort of mechanism to, I don't want to say require the homeowner or the property owner to repopulate their streetscape, but my experience, I've seen a lot of loss, but not a lot of replacement. And there's a stretch right around the corner of my house where I've seen, I think it is 4 houses that had 9 street trees when I moved in on one side of the street, and that side of the street no longer has any street trees along that section, which is about 150 yards of a football field and a half. And I went out there on an 85-degree day, and I was checking the temperature on my street that has a nice shady canopy, and an 85-degree day is about 80 degrees on the sidewalk, and it was about 120 to 118 to 125 degrees on parts of the asphalt or the sidewalk where there weren't any trees, just right around the corner. And it is not a hospitable place to walk or be. I mean, you certainly wouldn't want a pet to walk along that or be without a hat or sunglasses or a water bottle. It's rough. So anyway, I digress. But I would love to look at what sort of mechanisms we could have in place to go back to areas that need to be replanted. And maybe it's a community effort, but we heard from Stephanie how hard she's worked for 20 years with her neighborhood, and a lot of folks are resistant or don't have the income or money to plant. So I don't think the socioeconomic is an issue where I'm thinking about. There are other challenges or other reasons why these homeowners haven't replanted. I don't know.
Well, and I think last night there was some great ideas about like when there are situations where maybe there's a fine for trees being removed. I remember, I'm forgetting what the project was called over on Perry. I'm forgetting what it was called, an apartment complex, and they removed a bunch of oaks that were supposed to be preserved. And there was we fined them, made them replant them and fined them. And that structure of maybe you have a system where when you get funds like that, they go into a bank and they either go towards a replanting effort or they go, I think someone suggested if someone wants to plant a tree and doesn't have the funds to do it, maybe that money helps. Here's a tree, or here's a tree and a crew come out and spend whatever amount of time. So I think there's some room for creativity, and there's probably a multifaceted approach to make an impact over time. And Roger, I know we're not exactly talking about percentages, but when a project comes in, a development application, a brand new project, if there was a target, there was something written in the ordinance that we're looking for, I don't know, 30% canopy coverage, that would be a great guideline to have, to say, okay, when you're developing your landscape plan, this is what you should be shooting for. And so that would help with what types of trees you're putting in to make sure they're bigger canopies, or, how many trees or whatever. So, I think along the lines, that might be something we want to be looking at to set some sort of standard.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. That would be helpful, but I think it's a smaller percentage of the land that needs to be looked at.
It's just one, right. It's just one.
What I'm looking at is citywide, there's an overall problem here that we have neglected for many 50, 60 years. And we have to come back and look at it holistically at, boulevards, main boulevards that are high image streets, neighborhoods, private, public, funding, all those issues are huge. And it's kind of like it hasn't been dealt with for 60 years. And from what I hear from Cindy saying, it's all top down. It comes from the council. So somehow we need to get the priority of budgeting and directing that we want to take care of street trees. I don't know how we get it up there, but that's where it needs to be established.
And I do think, Cindy, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Ben mentioned this last night, that some of the inventory he's doing, it's parks, but it is also street tree canopy on some of the arterials.
Yeah, so I asked for him to go through downtown and the major arterials, so D Street, East Washington, Eli, like the bigger arterial streets. We were not going to have enough time in this scope this time particularly to do all of the neighborhoods, but I wanted to start the work, and we went through the park inventory much quicker than we anticipated. So he's doing the major arterials.
What I'm relating to is, I think Public Works has 8 or 12 street redo projects. They're repaving the streets, which includes moving curbs and gutters, which includes moving intersections closer together at where the pedestrian crossing. There's a ton of demolition and rebuilding of curbs. There's no street tree in mind. There is no street tree program that goes along with that project. There is no evaluation of street trees that goes along with that project. And that's immediate. That's going to happen in a few years. So those things need to be looked at. Here's a low-hanging fruit. Here's an opportunity. What can we do? Or do we want to do something? But right now, it's up to Public Works. There's no budget. There's no skill set. There's no involvement of anybody caring about trees.
I'm just going to step in here because that's not correct from my experience. And this is staff comments, so I don't want to delve into this too much, but I'll go ahead and just answer that. I mean, I've seen the requests come through for consultation on streets and trees in particular. Relief has been involved with the street trees for street projects and moving forward. As I understand it, it's a standard that they're building those in. So, I think we'd have to touch base with Public Works for sure, Roger, but that's my experience and what I've heard. And in meetings I've been in, that's what I've seen.
I've met with Public Works, with Relief. We've been called in by Public Works to say, tell us where we can plant trees. But there's no program. It's after construction drawings are done. It's after construction has started. Can we plant more trees here? And it's more of a public relations effort than a serious effort of doing.
Once again, I'm going to interrupt because that is incorrect. There's one project in particular, and that was North McDowell, which was post fact. But moving forward, they've already asked them, and actually Wendy and I had this conversation. So they have already asked for them to consult. They've asked me to have my staff who holds an arborist license on his own if he can consult on them. So I think that is shifting. I think North McDowell in particular, Roger, yes, it was after the fact because they had plans and like, oh, we want to put trees. And then they didn't, they hadn't thought that process through. But I've seen that already shift. And I think it's pretty standard after speaking to the director of public works recently, that it's a requirement that he's having of his staff to review it and include. So while
That's-
there's not a design standard, I'd say it's being prioritized.
Put into practice. I agree. That's the impression that I've gotten is that is shifting and it is being prioritized moving forward. So we're, happy to keep following up on that, but I think things are shifting with the attention to that.
Yeah, I think that I keep hearing over and over again about our antiquated street standards from 1994 or something, and I hear it enough, and I think that, especially in public works, that there's enough momentum there that they are going to be updated, and I think that bioswales, trees, all of these, they're not even modern concepts. They've been with us for 30 years. So our street standards are much older. So I think it's moving forward. I think there's hope in the dark there. So, go ahead.
Yeah, and just following up on this, I mean, we always call it the tree ordinance, but this is more than just one ordinance. I mean, this is a package of tree policy. So right now, do you guys have identified those kind of sections that you're focused on? Like obviously chapter 17 is tree preservation, whether that is expanded out of discretionary review or if there's like a separate chapter that's made to start getting into public right of way or other projects. And then you start thinking about design standards, whether it's street design standards, objective design standards, I would guess may have something about trees for projects that, don't have discretionary review. So do you have a sense of kind of what those segments are at this point? Or are we still kind of wrapping our head around all of the parts we need to touch? Because we're talking about so many different use
Yeah.
cases and issues.
Well, I think that's kind of what I mean when we have to do one thing first, right? Or a couple things first. That we have the tree advisory committee went through and they found every single place trees are referenced in in our zoning code, our smart code, our municipal code. And so we have that comprehensive list that the tree advisory committee, this was kind of to a point I think you and I were talking about in terms of like, we're building off of what this committee has done and the input they've provided. And that was our starting point. We gathered all that information to start. So two of the things that I think are front and center are the street tree section, and I want to say it's the 13 something in the municipal code, but don't hold me to that. But the section in the municipal code that talks about street trees, street tree permits, penalties, enforcement, appeals, that section, and then chapter 17 in the IZO. That's like our first, because it seems like that's the biggest bang for the buck in terms of like shifting the tide. Meanwhile, we're trying to do things like building permit, adding additional requirements for a building permit to show your trees on your site plan and some of those things that don't need codified, but we're recognizing, oh, well, that's kind of a hole. I thought the realtor that was there last night that said, hey, you guys should come to our monthly realtor group. It was like, I've gone to that group before on other topics. Maybe that's a good thing to go and talk about trees, So we are doing simultaneously as we're working on certain code sections. We're also trying to work on messaging and some of that kind of stuff. Street standards, that's a different project. It's going to be on a slightly different timeline. I know it's something that is on Public Works list of they want to update their street standards. There might be, I feel like maybe we have that as a program in the general plan policy frameworks. I feel like we talked about like, well, one of the reasons this is happening and we're putting this goal and, the street standards are something that really enforce or reinforce or don't. So those will be things that will be coming out of that as well. So also trees in the general plan update to like shift that conversation, shift that priority, that focus. And trees are kind of something that go across many different elements in the general plan.
I was going to say, I would love to think that this committee is invoked at all of these different touch points on policy when, oh, there's design standards, where do trees show up? But I think we can all do that as individuals. Roger and I are lucky enough to be on planning commission, so we'll see some of these design documents and we can really advocate for trees. But I think that's something, whether it's general plan discussions, anytime we see a policy come forward, now I'm a liaison from planning to bike and ped, and we've been redoing the active transit master plan. And I put in there, we should think about coverage percentages on all of our active transit network. And so I think there's a role for each of us just as tree committee members on our own to influence a lot of those policy discussions and say, okay, where are trees showing up? Are we making an allowance for trees? Are we budgeting for trees? I mean, that's a huge piece. And I think that was part of our conversation with our ad hoc too, with Ben Anderson, as he said that cities he's seen that do this really well. It's all stakeholders just being contacted and reminded, hey, we should enter trees here, whether that's Ken and Bjorn, kind of our traffic wizards, or whoever, just remind them and keep pushing that forward. Because I don't think we want to wait necessarily for design standards to try to move that conversation. So I totally agree. Another question that gets a little more specific for enforcement. Someone told me recently, and I don't remember who, that enforcement for this was going to move under community development, whereas now it might be with police. I know that's a little out of left field. Are there any changes there? Because we all wonder, who's following up on projects to make sure they do what they're supposed to do, or someone didn't get a street tree permit. How does that handle? Has that changed at all?
So code enforcement is moving under community development from police. So that is happening. It was code enforcement. One of the street trees that recently disappeared, it was code enforcement that went out and said, hey, what happened to your street tree? And you can't remove a street tree, and you need to go into the city and get a tree permit and replacement for that tree. And, so we are pulling them in for that kind of on the ground stuff. They're not the ones that go out like when a new project is being built, that is building and planning, that would go out to say, okay, before we're going to give certificate of occupancy, did you finish your landscape plan consistent with what the planning commission approved? Are your windows consistent with the elevations that were approved by the city? That's not enforcement, if you will. That's like condition compliance. Things with streets. So let's say you had a project where there was a subdivision and a new road that went in, and your improvement plans, and it showed street trees. So that's your public works inspector before that is finalized off and the bonds are returned to the developer. They're the ones that go out and they take the plans and say, did they do what we approved? Did they do what, we signed off on? So it depends on kind of which way you're coming at it.
Well, and especially we hear so much in the public about the street tree example, someone maybe not doing what they were supposed to. In my mind, moving it from police just because of their workload, the nature of the things they deal with, do you think this will lead to more timely enforcement, better response, or do you not have a sense yet? I know it's kind of a new.
I would say it's nice. They're sitting right down the hall from me, from the planners, from the, building staff. So there's more of a feeling like popping your head in somebody's office and saying, hey, did you hear about such and such, instead of somebody being in a building across town. So there's just that's an immediate change I feel with all of us just being in the same wing. So hey, Doug, and you see somebody in the hall and it reminds you to ask, and there's that natural collaboration.
And I think that could be seen as a positive for people worried about, enforcing those instances, as we might be getting a more efficient system in place for that. And then finally, I was just going to ask, we're talking about all these different policy pieces where trees are showing up kind of everywhere. I love hearing that we would have a third-party consultant to bring in as kind of a point person when some of these decisions are made, whether it's public works with a street design, having someone, I don't know if Ben Anderson would be the person for every request. I mean, and I guess that's the question, do you see that kind of third-party consultant as a solution that could help the rollout of all these different policies? Do you ever foresee having an urban forestry department or an urban forester on staff? I think that's a little different than an arborist and someone who has like a design sensibility and things like that, maybe both. What are your thoughts around that? Just because our committee's talked about that a lot in the past. And I mean, I'm hearing a lot of great developments out of this. Do you think the third party solution is like, that's going to meet our needs as a point? Do you ever see a department in the future?
So before I move to that, I want to just say one thing about the code enforcement thing. We have a very limited code enforcement staff. So I don't want you to now think, oh, they're in
We're not gonna
CDD
oversell it.
and all of a
Okay.
sudden, they've tripled or quadrupled in just the number of people or their bandwidth. They're still a very small staff. So just kind of trying to set expectations
Good
that
to
it's
know,
an
yeah.
improvement, but there's a lot of things that need code enforcement. And I will say that when there's health safety issues, those have to come first, right? So if you have a health safety issue, that's our number one priority, to make sure the public is safe. In terms, I think it is a great development that we have brought urban forestry on. I am not in a position to say what's going to happen, what staffing changes, hires, reorg, that kind of thing. I'm not in a position to weigh in on that. I will say I think this is a great first step. I will say that I'm using Ben a lot. I know Cindy's using Ben a lot. So I feel really great on that relationship and building that relationship. And I think that we will fall into that, and it will, where does it take us, and what do we need, and what's working really well? And we, are there things that we fix and now we can take those resources and put it towards a different component, So I'm optimistic. I feel really good about it. I think it is really important. And when I sat down originally to chat with Ben, I think it's really important that whoever is in that role, or if there were multiple, like if there was a list of consulting arborists that we would use, or, however it evolves in the future, I think it's really important that that arborist or that firm or that, kind of understands Petaluma and understand what we're going for. We had this conversation about, one person going out to prune a tree versus another person going out to prune a tree, and the results can look very different. And so one of the things I wanted to make sure of is if we were calling someone in to look at something on behalf of the city, that they knew what the city was looking for. They knew what we were aspiring to. They knew the vision and understood that. And I feel really good about that with Ben and his group right now. And so I'm excited to work with him and have that additional resource to support staff.
Well, I think this is all really positive, and there's a lot of good news for folks on this committee. And I think we're starting in the right places to set up the guardrails, the policies for moving forward. So we've got a backdrop of sensible tree policy. And then I think influencing private property owners, dealing with public right of way. I mean, those are much kind of bigger battles, I think. So I think that'll naturally kind of flow once we get a new set of rules in place. So yeah, thank you, Heather.
Thank you, Heather. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, you mentioned that the issue of protecting significant trees on public property is kind of a separate thing from the other issues that we're talking about with trees. I'm just curious as to what it would take to change the zoning laws to protect significant trees on public property. I'm sorry, on private
Property?
Yes.
So that's one of the things we're actively working on. One of the things, I don't want to, give away the awe of a study session, but some of the things we're looking at is like redefining. Our ordinance is set up really around protected trees only. So maybe we're not just looking at protected trees. Maybe we're looking at all trees over a certain size, so that it's, so that's one. And two, for some reason, what our code says is if you don't have a discretionary review, then you are exempt from the ordinance. So none of it applies to you if you're just a homeowner and you want to take a tree out. And so, what most jurisdictions would do is say, no, you need a tree permit for any tree removal and define trees in a much broader sense than what we do as, the 8 or 10 species we identify as protected trees. So those are two things we're looking at.
Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. I had a bunch of questions, but I think they've all been answered. I appreciate our conversation last night, and I appreciate the sad fact of this redwood coming down is leading to this further discussion, this deeper discussion, and I'm going to tell my neighbor, and I think she'll be pleased because she did feel bad that this tree did come down. And then I guess you and I will talk more with Cindy about this interim tree list, because I am interested in getting something out sooner than later, if that's a possibility. I keep hearing about the tree coverage, city coverage, and I keep hearing 30% over and over again. So it seems like a worthy sort of number to go to. And I think 30% doesn't sound like much, but I think it actually, when you take the square footage with buildings and everything else in mind and streets, it can be quite a bit. So, I too is the enforcement, the oversight. I've got my office is on the corner, is the B of A building on the corner of in Washington and Petaluma Boulevard. And yes, trucks have run over several of those ginkgos, and they're just jagged sticks sticking out of the thing. And it's been that way for like 2 years. So, I'm sensitive to the fact that code enforcement is small and stuff, but things like that seem like low-hanging fruit. Things like, recent remodels on D Street, which have taken out large sycamore trees, which I think current code says they need to replace them because they're in the right-of-way. Those developments have been done for years, and there's no trees. There's all the sycamores that came out on Petaluma Boulevard South in front of that factory. There's nothing there. And as I understand code, is that those were meant to be replaced as soon as they came out. So that seems to be, as far as enforcement goes, that seems to be low-hanging fruit that could be dealt with right away. Everything else I think has been answered, and I appreciate you coming out. I really do. I think it helps us all. We all had a lot of questions, and we got them answered, and I appreciate your efforts. I really, and thank you.
Thank you for having
Yeah,
me.
Cindy, I want to say I appreciate your efforts too, and your open attitude. I think it's important.
Thank you.
All right, open up for further staff comment.
Sure. I just wanted to say thank you for those who were able to make it last night to the UFM kickoff. I think it was really successful. We got a lot of feedback back. So as Ben starts writing that UFM, it helps us create that vision statement. There will be a second community meeting as we get through that process, and I'll let you guys know so you can partake. We're moving. His inventory, it's on the GIS. We'll be sharing it all once he kind of gets everything together, but it's really quite phenomenal because in the public spaces, you can see where each tree is. You can click on it. You can get the information, the species, kind of what he thinks the condition is. It's all in there. So it's been really nice. He's been really busy. But beyond that, it's just we'll be moving fairly rapidly. He'll be writing this, and I think he said this last night. I told him he had to be done with it by the end of the year because I want to make sure that it dovetails with the ordinance update, and I anticipate that to go in the first quarter to council is what Heather and I spoke about. So that's kind of the time frame we're looking at. So they are moving, but not without thought. And I think Heather hit on one of the major things is that Ben gets the community. He lives here. He cares about it, and that shows in the work that he's doing. I think one of the things, too, is that, last night that I brought up, it's not that I'm not against the percentages. I think we should hit a percentage. I don't want to compare us to anywhere else. I want to do what's Petaluma right. And I also don't want to compare us to, like, I think what was brought up was Vallejo, because the last time it was brought up in a public space, it was in a derogatory way. And I don't want to speak in a negative way about any other municipality, any other space. I don't think that does us any justice as who we are as a community, because that's not who we are. And I'm not going to help us move forward in that way. I'm going to say, we're going to pick a goal for us. We're going to get there. We're working hard. I do know that sometimes it feels like, it's like, oh, Cindy, we're just looking at public spaces. That was just step one, and that's something I could help move forward, right, in an easy way. Like, I'm like, okay, like, we've got parks, I've got public spaces, you want to plant, let's get the plan together. Phase two is we're going to still try and get to the other spaces, frontages, medians, all of those, we know it. A lot of discussions on how we get that done. Even in assessment districts, I go, there's areas where trees have come out over the years because they've died. I go, I've got a whole frontage that's open. And Relief and I were talking, I'm like, can we plant some trees here? How do we make that happen? If irrigation's gone, that's probably the bigger issue I'll tell you that we meet, is that the irrigation is, we just don't know we haven't found the way to bridge that. Because one of the things is we can do gator bags. If we can get something like Cool Petaluma to help us out and fill those gator bags for people who live close by, it's great. If not, to hire in a company to do a water buffalo and fill the gators, it's not efficient, it's not cost efficient. So we're just trying to figure out a best laid plan, but we're moving forward. I was really excited that the community that come out, I think there was a lot of great questions that was brought forward, and I think there was a lot of good energy. So I'm just excited, and Ben will keep moving forward. Those are our major things, and just always thankful for the committee, and I'm glad Heather could come out today. I wanted her to give an update, so I'm glad she could make it. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy. I will add on to my, if I may, to my committee. Last meeting, it was pointed out to me that with the North River project, I brought up there was some partnership with the Sonoma Land Trust and the, I think I said the Coastal Commission, but it's actually the Coastal Conservancy. So I just wanted to make that clear. So that's it.
Will we be getting a presentation on is that still planned?
I've asked Elizabeth Howland and Stephanie if they will, and they have agreed to. We just need to get it on the schedule. And some very, very exciting things are happening. I just spoke to the director of acquisition for Sonoma Land Trust because a couple of days ago, and he gave me some very good news. So anyway.
I'm sorry, I'll dovetail on the end of mine. I forgot it. Just a minor update. Well, maybe not minor. Relief is also going to be planning more parks. CAL FIRE came back to fund them some more, so they'll have a very busy fall planting season beyond the parks that they brought forward to us. And look for big news. It's on the federal website. The city hasn't put news up, but we may have been awarded a tidy grant, maybe not the full, but a pretty substantial sum. So once I have official word, I'll share that with you guys as well. But lots of good news on the tree front.
So, well, I have news from Wendy. Should I share it? She said this is a quiet heads up. City will soon announce, but it's been on the U.S. Forest Service website for several days. We won a $1 million grant from the Biden Climate Act for our urban forest. Relief equals main partner. Created concept plan, co-wrote application. Application only got half of what we asked for. So the plan will have to be winnowed down and impossible to say exactly what will be in it, but we have to deliver thousands of new trees. So that is clear. Other goodies too, I think. That was from Wendy on Saturday.
And we may be the only agency or municipality north of San Francisco that was awarded. Not to say, I don't know if anybody else applied, but I think it's a pretty big deal.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Well done. Well done, Wendy, if you're listening. So well done, Cindy. Because we say city, but it's actually Cindy. So, yeah. Well, as seeing that there is nothing else, then I will move to adjourn. Meeting is adjourned.
Recording stopped.